Hey, we're on it. We got a good cop, bad cop thing going up here. Maria's the good cop.
Oh, you're good cop. Okay, perfect. We would ask, just because of the speediness of the quick shots, as much as the speakers can be upfront, to limit the amount of transition time. We sincerely appreciate it. Off to the excellent moderators here.
Okay, everybody, we're gonna get started. My name's Jason Kempenick from UT San Antonio.
Maria Spakanos from Zucker School of Medicine, Northwell.
Okay, we would ask for the people who are presenting, once the presenter finishes during their question time, if you just, the next one, just come up and stand by the stairs. We want to kind of keep it rolling and make sure it's going, okay? If you have questions to ask and you sense the presentation is coming to an end, come up to the microphone fast so we can make sure we have a good question and a good answer. With that, we'll get started with Rebecca Tang presenting challenges facing surgical trainees with small hand size, a mixed methods multi-institutional study.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity to present our work looking at challenges facing surgical trainees with small hand size. This work is funded on an internal grant, but we have no conflicts of interest to disclose. As the surgical workforce has diversified, we have an increasing number of surgeons with smaller hands, but instrument design has not changed, leading to a growing ergonomic mismatch. Although these ergonomic challenges have been previously described, we know very little about the impact on the educational experience of trainees with small hands. To answer this question, we conducted a multi-institutional mixed methods study. The first component was a survey querying general surgery residents and faculty about their demographics, hand size, and perceived impact on completing operative tasks. We then conducted semi-structured interviews with residents with small hand size, as well as their educators with and without small hand size. We achieved an approximately 50% survey response rate, and we defined small hand size as glove size 6.5 or smaller, as this was our median. And notably, there was a full glove size difference between men and women in our study. When we asked how often hand size impacted their ability to perform tasks in the operating room, trainees with small hand size reported 3 times the frequency of perceived impact as their counterparts without small hand size. Themes from our interviews included technical and ergonomic challenges, slower skill acquisition, negative psychological consequences, impacts on evaluations and operative autonomy, inconsistent support from educators, and strategies for overcoming these challenges. Regarding technical challenges, surgeons with small hand size identified several problem instruments, including colonoscopes, mechanical staplers, laparoscopic instruments, and large open instruments. Additionally, the appropriate glove sizes weren't always available, not just in the ORs, but also in supply rooms on the floor and in the ED and ICU, where trainees are often performing procedures. This led to slower skill acquisition that impacted the early learning curve. Residents essentially had to learn 2 skills at once, the first being modified hand positioning on the instrument, and the second being the actual operative technique. And because residents felt like they were falling behind, this led to negative emotions in the OR, including stress, embarrassment, frustration, and self-doubt. Residents also feared being judged if they brought up hand size as a concern. They did not want to be perceived as making excuses for incompetence. Residents also worried about their evaluations because attendings might attribute any clumsiness stemming from ergonomic challenges to technical inadequacy. And in fact, when attendings were asked about this, they said that if they didn't know that hand size was contributing, that might impact their evaluation of the resident. This naturally led to concerns about losing operative autonomy. Often when residents were struggling, the instruments in the case would get taken away, which in turn limited their ability to learn. And all of these challenges are compounded by inconsistent support from educators. Most trainees in our study said that when they were struggling in the OR, they rarely received targeted advice, partially because most attendings just didn't know how to help them. Instead, they had to figure it out on their own. Trainees were frequently asked questions like, "Why can't you do this?" which they did not feel was helpful for troubleshooting. Being asked this only added to their sense of frustration and self-doubt. And interestingly, attendings could be understanding about one set of challenges, but less supportive about others. Even during the interviews, when asked about some of the challenges reported by trainees, one attending said, "It doesn't matter whether your fingers are big or small, you just need to know how to do it." But not all is lost. Surgeons with small hand size have developed a number of strategies for overcoming these challenges, including technical workarounds, deliberate practice, self-advocacy, and role modeling. And in the end, attendings found small hands to be advantageous, if anything, for their dexterity and ability to reach small spaces. So putting it all together, these themes are very interrelated, and residents can enter this toxic cycle that derails their learning experience and operative progression until, through these strategies we've identified, they break out of this cycle. And finally, you might be asking what you can do. And so here's some advice taken directly from our interviewees. For learners, acknowledge challenges with a growth mindset. Practice handling instruments outside the OR and train your grip strength. Advocate for yourself by proactively discussing any issues with your educators and seeking out role models. For educators, recognize that this is a real issue that impacts your trainees, particularly your junior trainees, and add hand size to your troubleshooting checklist when residents are struggling. Your attitude can destigmatize the challenges they face and help residents identify mentors early on. Thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions now.
Back microphone.
Hi, Kristen Oliver from Yale. As a left-handed, small-handed surgeon, I have spent a lot of time working with our left-handed residents about how to change their position and the different things, and they often have these exact same challenges. I just wondered if you looked at that or if you have any comments about left-handedness.
Thank you for your question. I am also a left-handed, small-handed surgeon. I do think one of the fascinating things about the framework that we developed is that, at least from anecdotal experience, these are very much similar in that often in the junior years, a lot of effort is spent on trying to figure out just these mechanics and these adjustments. But in the end, it seems to become an advantage.
Did you have the opportunity to analyze experienced small-handed surgeons versus trainees in perceptions? Did they align or not?
Yes. So in our surveys, we did ask about the years of experience, both among trainees and attendings. By the time that most of the respondents reached being an attending, they perceived less of an impact. It was about half. In the interviews, the themes that came across there were more that there's a little bit more agency. Attendings actually suggested choosing different instruments, which unsurprisingly trainees did not, but that is one thing that really helped.
All right, thank you very much. Next, we'll have Dr. Joshua Rochelle. He'll be discussing Out of Touch, a nationwide mixed methods e-learning needs assessment of general surgery residents.
Thank you to the APDS for giving me the opportunity to present our work. These are my disclosures. So for generations, case volume and years in training were used as surrogate measures of competency for surgeons entering independent practice. As we all know, in 2023, that changed when the APDS rolled out the Entrustable Professional Activities Project. Now, based on the backward design theory of curriculum development, when we change an assessment paradigm, like we did with the EPAs, we should also be reevaluating our instructional materials. And so that was the aim of this study. Speaking of instructional materials, at the undergraduate medical education level, online learning or e-learning resources are heavily relied upon and often replace the traditional curricula delivered by medical schools. At the graduate medical education level, initiatives like the SCORE web portal and TrueLearn have also progressively shifted the learning environment from the clinic to the cloud. So we set out to answer 3 questions. What are general surgery residents' preferences, attitudes, and experiences with online learning resources in residency? And how does that compare to some of the other resources they might have used during their professional development? And then how do they perceive current e-learning resources in aligning with the Entrustable Professional Activities assessment paradigm? So we did a convergent parallel mixed methods study where we surveyed and interviewed general surgery residents across the United States. 106 surveys were completed by PGY 1 through 5 general surgery residents, most commonly research residents throughout the US. And compared to medical school online learning resources, general surgery residents were statistically significantly less satisfied with online learning resources in residency and spent less of their own money out of pocket for them. We had 30 semi-structured interviews completed by PGY 1 through 4 general surgery residents, again, most commonly research residents, from various types of training programs throughout the country. And from the interview results, we performed a thematic analysis. What are their experiences, attitudes, and preferences as it relates to e-learning? Let's see. There we go. In terms of experiences, general surgery residents prefer the online learning resources that they use in medical school, which we found in the survey. And in general, they found that the resources that they have access to in residency are very heavily focused for standardized exams and are inadequate for the EPA project. One participant said in relation to their medical school resources, it was all comprehensive. It had good ways to remember certain things and group things together. So it wasn't like all these standalone facts. It was a whole story of whatever topic you were learning. And another participant said, the way general surgery residents study right now, I don't think is built for the EPAs. In terms of their attitudes, general surgery residents value online learning in their professional education journeys and claim that the on-the-go capabilities of e-learning has enabled them to take ownership of their education. One participant said that the online library is fantastic because I don't have to carry around with this resource with me to work, and I can read it while I'm walking around. They had certain concerns about the depth that e-learning resources can achieve, though. And then finally, in terms of their preferences, general surgery residents value e-learning resources that harness learning science research, such as spaced repetition and gamification, to deliver multimedia content in a user-friendly way. One resident remarked, I don't like to have to guess what I need to know. I want somebody to tell me this is what you need to know in the most basic situations. And that user interface is particularly important for our digital natives. One user said, the user interface limits my patience with this specific platform. Like I cringe every time that I have to deal with it. Let's see. And so our conclusions from this study is that there's a significant disconnect between the online learning resources that are used in undergraduate and postgraduate medical education, and that current e-learning resources in residency lack clinical relevance and don't align with competency-based assessments. And we as stakeholders in surgical education should use the insights from this study to design instructional materials that align with both EPAs and our learner preferences. And so moving forward, that's what we're doing. Our group is working to develop a mobile education platform to help support trainees on their journeys to competency. We're affectionately referring to it as the Duolingo of surgical education, if you're familiar with the American Education Technology Company. But the mission is similar. Use data and technology to deliver effective and engaging learning experiences grounded in learning science research to our trainees' fingertips. And so this isn't a solo journey. I'd like to thank all of the collaborators and our mentors that worked on this study with us. And if you want to read our manuscript that was just published in the Journal of Surgical Education a couple of weeks ago, or try Duolingo for Surgical Education, feel free to scan this QR code.
Okay. So that was wonderful and very interesting, I think very helpful. So all this AI and e-learning tools, how can we use this for formative feedback for our residents?
I think we can use, coming a little bit from the talk in the past hour, large language models can be used to simulate experiences that residents have on a day-to-day basis, whether it's presenting a consult to an attending surgeon or even a simulated patient. You don't need to have an actual human being there. You can train an AI to act like an attending surgeon and then present a consult to them. In fact, we have a project where we're doing just that.
So your data is all people's opinions about how they feel. So in medical student, you have a 4 to 8 week rotation that you have to study for and then take a test. People
Mhm.
learn surgery over 5 years. I
Mhm.
think there's a big shift that the resident has to make in how they study for that. Do you think that could play a part at all in their dissatisfaction with some of the resources that are available?
It could. I think that we were really trying to get is in terms of how the material is presented. And I think particularly for the surgery clerkship experience, everything is condensed into a 6-week period. And so if you do have more time, ideally the material should be presented in a way that's progressive rather than what they claim is seems to be a random assortment of facts.
All right, thank you very much.
Mm.
Next, we have Michael Fury presenting novel use of ACGME milestones in resident morbidity and mortality conference presentation feedback.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to present our work. We don't have any financial disclosures. So the Morbidity and Mortality Conference, we'll call it M&M, has been dubbed the golden hour of surgical education. Attendance is mandatory at most places, and it's an ACGME requirement that surgical programs have this set up. We feel that presentations by residents are a good snapshot of their understanding of clinical reasoning and quality improvement opportunities. So our question was, if the clinical competency committees use milestones to make resident advancement decisions, could we use M&M conference feedback survey from presentations to identify a struggling resident sooner? And hopefully that would mean we could see this before the biannual CCC committee meetings. So our aims were to investigate the impact of M&M conference presentation feedback, as well as correlate resident M&M presentation skills with the ACGME surgery milestones. So we started this out as a kind of an education quality improvement project from December of 23 to June of 24, and then solicited feedback from the residents that had presented at M&M and anyone that attended the M&M conference and provided feedback to the presenters. And then we made some changes to the survey and again, kind of did this reflection survey. So the reflection surveys were sent to one version to the residents that presented a case and one version to everyone that watched them present, basically. And from all the changes we made, the interesting correlation we'll talk about is this overall presentation rating where evaluators rated the presentation on a scale from 1 to 10, but worst to best. 2 authors selected the 7 ACG milestones of competencies, and these are the 6 main core competencies for surgery. And from there, with further deliberation, 3 final subcompetencies were identified: patient evaluation and decision-making, postoperative patient care, patient safety and quality improvement. And those 3 selected subcompetencies were correlated with the milestone levels rated 0 through 5 from the most recent CCC committee meeting to that score, that 1 to 10 overall presentation score. So we collected over 368 evaluations, the majority being from residents, around 73%, attendings 26%, and then the other 1% was from nurses and medical students. 20 resident presenters were evaluated over the course of 36 M&M conferences. So looking at the reflection surveys that we asked the residents who had presented, around 75% found them helpful. Greater than 80% said they were using it to change their presentation and improve. And around 80% still wanted to receive feedback. Interestingly enough, even if they said it wasn't helpful, some of them still wanted to receive feedback. Same thing for the evaluators. So this was a mix of residents who may not have presented, attendings, nursing staff, et cetera. And again, 80% said they were helpful. Around 70% thought the presenters were using the feedback. And 90% roughly said, yeah, we're going to continue to do this. And again, interestingly, even if they didn't find the feedback survey valuable, they said they would continue to fill it out. And then the main point here was to look at the milestones. So on the bottom left here, you see our 3 that we selected: systems-based practice, patient care 1, and patient care 4, all of which showing a weekly positive correlation, but nonetheless statistically significant across all 3. And as you can see, there's outliers located on the bottom of the graph. So again, this idea that the correlation could be used to help identify folks that might be struggling. So M&M conferences provide a frequent formative assessment opportunity to evaluate residents. And we were looking at this feedback survey, almost kind of the equivalent to like a micro assessment similar to an EPA. The idea that these M&M feedback surveys could kind of fill a feedback gap that's created by the decrease in oral presentations, such that when a resident's seeing a consult, sometimes now it's a secure text message that is sent instead of being at bedside and presenting a patient formally to either the chief resident or an attending. And then M&M feedback surveys results were made clear to the trainee that feedback was being given. So at the end of their bi-weekly, an email was sent to the resident stating, hey, here's your feedback from your most recent presentation. So with that, we think there's value in providing these feedback surveys because it was really peer driven. As you saw, most of the results were sent by residents. So we did find a significant positive correlation with the CCC milestones: patient care 1, patient care 4, and systems-based practice 1. And kind of going forward, we would like to have a comprehensive dashboard for residents to be able to view this information and use it to prepare for future presentations, continue to collect it, and put it as part of a larger discussion for clinical performance. And then lastly, again, hopefully identify those that need a little extra help sooner and further investigate a possible intervention to do that. So thank you very much. I'll take any questions.
Question up here.
Hi, John Greer. I enjoyed your talk. Maybe I missed this, but did you have them separated out by level? Because I know in our program, the 2s often will have the breast complications and their talks are probably 3 times too long. And after you've had 5 pancreas leaks, your talks are very short. And I imagine that level also corresponds to milestone level. So did you break that down in your data?
We did, and we didn't have enough presentations from each level to kind of look at statistical significance. But interestingly enough, the outlier there was actually a senior resident who was kind of struggling in both their presentations and their milestones. So again, it kind of goes along with our idea of hopefully that means we could help and intervene sooner rather than later.
Would you use your data? What do you think about the statement? Okay, someone might be struggling. We're going to have them present more often at M&M, and the positives and cons of doing something like that in your mind.
I would hope that it's met with more of an intervention of, hey, your peers and some of your attendings note that you're having some trouble. What can we help you with before your next presentation? Not necessarily the M&M chief front loading this person with weekly M&Ms.
Do you think there could be a halo or a horn effect in your milestone to presentation correlational data?
So I think that overall presentation score definitely is a subjective kind of 1 through 10, but interestingly enough, when you correlate it with a different group of people, the faculty that are on the CCC making those final milestone determinations, the fact that it's statistically even mildly weakly correlated, I thought was still interesting because it's 2 separate groups of kind of subjective opinions. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Dr. Manuel Castillo Angeles for intersection of gender and time in practice, differences in trainee evaluations of surgical faculty.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present our work. We have no disclosures. Performance evaluations provided by trainees can be one of the metrics used in determining faculty career advancement. Results from prior studies have been mixed when investigating negative bias towards female faculty. However, most studies have focused on other specialties or only analyzed either qualitative or quantitative data. Therefore, our goal was to better understand the differences in faculty evaluations by analyzing both quantitative and qualitative data. This was a multi-center, convergent, parallel mixed method study of trainee evaluations of surgical faculty, which included a quantitative phase through a longitudinal analysis of faculty scores and a qualitative phase through the thematic content analysis. We collected full-time faculty evaluations by residents in a general surgery residency program, which includes rotations in 3 institutions from July 2013 to June 2023. Our main exposure was a combination of gender and time in clinical practice. This resulted in 4 comparison groups: males with more than 5 years of experience, which was our reference group for the analysis, males and females with 5 or less years of experience, and females with more than 5 years of experience. Residents were asked to evaluate faculty on these 6 categories, which included serving as a role model, creating a healthy learning environment, providing appropriate autonomy in the OR, feedback, and deserving academic promotion. Each category was rated from 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree, and average scores per faculty were our main outcomes. To account for repeated measures data, multi-level mixed effects generalized linear models were used to determine the association between the combination of gender and time in clinical practice and our main outcomes. Qualitative data was obtained from 2 open-ended questions inquiring about faculty's strengths and areas for improvement. 2 researchers read the responses and coded them individually using content analysis. Recurrent themes were identified, and relevant quotes were classified according to these themes. During the study period, there were a total of 6,609 resident evaluations of 84 faculty. Of all faculty members, 27% were female and 58% were white. Our main comparison group showed that half of evaluated faculty members were male with more than 5 years of experience. In unadjusted analysis, mean scores from female attendings with 5 or less years of experience were significantly lower than the other groups in all categories, even after post-hoc comparisons. However, after adjusted analysis, being a female attending with 5 or less years of experience was only significantly associated with lower scores in the category regarding providing appropriate autonomy in the OR. Qualitative analysis showed that 5 major themes emerged. The first 2 themes here had similar quotes regardless of gender or time in clinical practice. However, there were contrasting results regarding the remaining 3 themes. Regarding the first theme here, female attendings were deemed aggressive and uncooperative when interacting with members of the surgical team, and residents perceived that this had a significant impact in the learning environment. However, there were no significant differences in adjusted score in the respective category. In the second theme, residents stated that female attendings were harsh, dismissive, and unprofessional when delivering feedback, while describing male attendings as supportive and clear when providing actionable feedback. Again, the quantitative results show no significant differences. In the third theme, residents emphasized that while male attendings provided stepwise autonomy and responsibility in the OR, female attendings provided limited to no autonomy, which hindered their education. The quantitative results in this case reinforce this claim. In conclusion, this study shows that even though quantitatively evaluation scores show no significant difference in most core areas, qualitative analysis show disparate results. Female faculty with fewer years of experience had notably more negative narrative evaluations, and it was mostly centered on their behavior and personality instead of their technical skills or level of knowledge. Being able to provide appropriate autonomy in the OR was the only category where both quantitative and qualitative results converge. Finally, female faculty with more than 5 years of experience had outstanding comments similar to experienced male surgeons. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Hi, my name is Jorge. I'm from WashU. I wanted to ask you if you looked at this based on the resident demographics as well, because probably perceptions of, the personality of the female surgeons kind of depends on your own gender and your experience.
No, that's definitely a great question, because we've seen that the dyad of the gender between the resident and the faculty has definitely impacted those scores in prior research. However, in our case, because we want to protect our residents, we make those anonymous. So that's a big limitation of our study.
So what support systems can you provide junior women faculty in their dual roles as surgeons and educators?
This is an important question, and this is what we're starting to do with these results. I think the first step is we're going to present this to the Department of Surgery in our institution and create awareness. And I think from there, we're going to try to start focus groups and or guided interviews that will evaluate both the residents and the faculty to see what is their perspective. Because what we've seen before is that most people may have the same expectations, they just don't communicate with each other. And I think if we see that, we'll be able to do something from there.
Do you think there are any factors the trainees bring to the table that potentially contribute to the interaction?
Oh, definitely. Now, we've seen in prior research, as I mentioned before, that residents, not just the level of training, but the gender and even race has impacted this type of scores. And that's a big limitation of the study because, as I mentioned, all these evaluations are anonymous. But I think in the next step of this study, which will be trying to do focus group with residents and trying to get a little bit more from them, we might be able to see some of that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Vincent Yang presenting correlation of personality testing with residency recruitment and PGY1 performance.
All right. Hi, my name is Vincent Yang. I'm a rising third year from UTMB down in Galveston, and I'm really excited to present our project today. And here are our disclosures. So for some background, the residency application process has become increasingly complex with a lesser reliance on more traditional metrics like USMLE step scores. In other industries, personality assessments have been used successfully to select candidates who are a strong fit for specific roles. However, their role in resident selection does remain underexplored. So these were the personality traits that we looked at, things like openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and emotional stability. And these were taken from the Big Five personality tests, in addition to other characteristics like grit, IQ, me versus other, and entitlement, which were also taken from other sources of validated measurement methods. And these were all the objective metrics that we analyzed, things like their surgery clerkship grade, their step 1 and 2 score, the score change between the two tests, and their interview average, and the total score of the applicant's application. So our study aimed to determine whether or not certain personality traits could correlate with performance in residency interviews and success during the PGY 1 year. If a strong correlation does exist, we think that personality testing could serve as an additional tool to better guide residency recruitment and selection. So to investigate this, we gathered data from 586 general surgery residency applicants. We excluded anybody with incomplete records and then used logistic regression models to identify any potential correlation between the objective metrics and personality traits that we looked at. So for our key findings, these were all the data, or these were all the major trends that we're seeing with applicants to the general surgery residency program. Everything in red is a negative correlation, everything in green is a positive correlation, and anything marked with an asterisk signifies a significant relationship. So here we see the data points that we tested via logistic regression, and while some may not have reached statistical significance, certain traits like extroversion, emotional stability, openness, and IQ, and entitlement did show some significant relationships with the objective metrics that we looked at. For example, if we take extroversion, we can see that it had a negative correlation with the USMLE Step 1 score, and this could lead to potential conclusions that perhaps people or applicants who scored higher on the extroversion scale might prioritize other things aside from step 1 studying, like their extracurricular activities, other hobbies, other activities that could lead to that correlation. And so here, everything that's circled in white is a relationship that did not reach statistical significance, but did approach it, and therefore could be some interesting sources of data points to investigate further down the road. And here is our data for our PGY1s. So we looked at our PGY1 data, and of the ACG and me milestones seen here, openness, entitlement, and me versus other were significantly correlated to only medical knowledge. Take, for example, in the case of me versus other, it could suggest an inherently more competitive or more competitive personality leads to a higher motivation and mastering or desiring to learn the needed medical knowledge for their service that they're on. Sorry. Okay. So in conclusion, these mixed results highlight the complexity of evaluating residency applicants beyond just their academic metrics. We believe that while the difficulty in parsing out the best fit applicant for residency programs is increasing, personality tests could be a useful tool in this process. And despite the limited significant relationships as of now, fully disregarding the utility of personality tests may be premature. Lastly, further research should analyze larger data sets, to validate these findings, and future directions could include more longitudinal tracking of residents all the way until graduation, or utilizing other personality tests and analyze those trends as well. Thank you very much for coming, and happy to take any questions.
No, I have a question. Could these personality tests introduce unfair bias or disadvantage certain applicants, and how do you mitigate that risk?
So there can be like the social desirability bias in that applicants would tend to try to, I guess, gamify the responses to best match what they think the PD or the program might want to see in an applicant. And as of now, the ways that we could do to mitigate that, or is the way we kind of like give the surveys. We tend to we plan to give the surveys when they come in for their interviews, so it's not like something they can prepare for beforehand. Although we do understand that despite that, they still will try to gamify it. We think that since most applicants, or we think that anyone who would take the surveys may have that in mind already, it kind of, in a sense, levels the playing field, but that is an inherent bias that does remain. But it is, again, a holistic application that we're trying to gear for. And this is just another tool that would add some more insight into applicants, not necessarily a replacement or something we would place like extra weight on.
I mean, I would just push back a little bit and say that when you look at like the grit scale and personality tests, I mean, they really are effective when they're used for self-reflection and there's no high stakes ulterior motive. And so I really question whether or not you can actually really use those results for selection, because for sure, they're going to gamify it. They're going to want to say what they think. That's my bias, unless you can show otherwise, I think.
Yeah, and as of now, these aren't. It is a preliminary like venture into this field or into this idea, but it is just right now a QI, and we're not exactly using this for like hard selection criteria. So it's just more so if we can see if there's any like correlations in the future that we could use as an adjunct to what we have right now.
Thank you, Dr. Yang.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Dr. Jeffrey Melvin. Can preference signaling streamline the applicant selection process?
Hi, everybody. My name's Jeffrey Melvin. I'm a resident at Boston Medical Center, and I'm excited to present our work today on preference signaling in the applicant selection process. So as we all know, and I've talked about this conference, applications to general surgery residency programs have increased significantly over the years, and screening applications for interview selection is a very labor-intensive process. If done holistically, that is both costly and time-consuming for applicants and programs alike. Preference signaling was introduced to help combat the number of applications and reduce utilization. It was first implemented into the residency process in 2020, starting with ENT, and was followed shortly thereafter by orthopedic surgery. In general surgery, preference signals were introduced in the 2021-2022 application cycle, starting with 5 signals and expanded to 15 signals per applicant, which gave the opportunity to our program to review and offer interviews to only those applicants who signaled a preference. Our study objective was to see if using preference signaling as a screening tool to streamline the interview selection process affected applicant demographics between the last 3 application cycles. So to narrow our interview list down from over 1,000 applicants to roughly 300 applicants, striving to avoid the pitfalls of high board score minimums, after initial program director review, we had the majority of the applications screened by faculty members in a process called phase 1. Using whatever method they chose, but with encouragement for them to use the dean's letter, personal statement, experiences, and research, they advanced the requested number of applications to the next stage. Those 300 applications are then holistically reviewed in a process called Phase 2. In 2025, with the onset of 15 preference signals available to applicants, we completely eliminated Phase 1, only interviewing those applicants who preference signaled us. We compared the demographics of holistically reviewed applicants for 2023, 2024, and 2025. So this figure just represents each year and how we screened our applicants. So in 2023, after initial program director screening, we had 761 applicants. This included both signaled and non-signaled applicants. All these applicants underwent a Phase 1 faculty review that was labor intensive to reach that group of 300 that underwent a more comprehensive holistic review to select for interviews. In 2024, we split this up a little bit. So after initial program director screening, we had 159 applicants who signaled us. Those were automatically moved to the Phase 2 holistic review. And then in order to reach that group of 300, we had 296 applicants that did not signal us, that underwent a Phase 1 labor intensive process and faculty review to get that larger number of 300. And then in 2025, with the onset of 15 preference signals, and after program director screening, we had 295 applicants who signaled us. And so we holistically reviewed all of those applicants. This is a standardized scoring rubric we use for our holistic review of the 300 applicants in our Phase 2 process. In this study in particular, we keyed in on the final question, which is outlined here in red, and it discusses the reviewer's perception of how well an applicant will do at BMC. We use this as a marker of quality that we compared across all 3 years. I first show you here a table from 2024 where half of our applicants were faculty selected and half were preference signaled. And as you can see, there was no significant difference in step scores, race category, gender, geographic region, or reviewer score. Here, we're comparing all of the last 3 application cycles. And with the exception of step scores, there was no significant difference in race, gender, geographical region, or reviewer score, or number of unique medical schools. The difference in step scores is consistent with the yearly increase in the step 2 score nationwide, and is largely insignificant. So our study concludes that preference signaling can be a valuable tool for programs across the country. Institutions only have a month from the time residency applications are received to offering interviews. Thus, narrowing down a list of over 1,000 applications while remaining committed to a holistic review can be a daunting task. Preference signaling can relieve this burden and labor-intensive process and allow programs to spend more time reviewing applications holistically without the worry of affecting the quality or demographics of applicants they historically interview. In addition, with the average number of signals per program being 229, our method may be useful to a large number of programs nationwide. Questions?
Hi, Sarah from Mayo. Great work, and it's exciting to see how preference signaling can really change residency recruitment. Relying mostly or solely on preference signaling can be a challenge because it relies on an applicant's ability to see how well they would fit at your institution before ever visiting, relying on things like Doximity or the program website. I'm kind of curious if you feel like you're missing out on applicants who may fit very well at your institution, but just couldn't see themselves there based on your website.
I think absolutely you can definitely miss a whole group of applicants by relying solely on preference signaling, but you're still going to capture enough that you're going to match people at your institution that fit very, very well there. So, it's not without its limitations, but even, without preference signaling, you're still going to miss those applicants. And I think there's enough resources these days online for applicants to really find if they're going to be a good fit at that program. And so I think there's sufficient information for them out there.
Quick question, Dr. Spain, and a quick answer.
Yeah, I worry, like, I think for us, probably works fine, right? But what about like community programs, maybe that don't have as big a profile as an academic, university-based program? Is it different for them?
It may be, but with the average number being, 290 preference signals per institution, then, that should theoretically be enough applicants to pull from. But, if you don't have that many preference signals at your individual institution, then you're going to have to look further and expand your search and interview applicants that don't just preference signal you. So I think it's an institution to institution basis.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Chang, EPA field analysis, real life EPA practice, habits differ from expected.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to present our work. We have no relevant disclosures. A key objective of the APDS EPA initiative is to address the deficit of data entrustment outside of the operating room. This includes clinical settings such as the hospital preoperative area, emergency department, hospital ward, ICU, and the clinic. Currently, the observable behaviors within the pre- and postoperative phases of the EPA assessments, which are highlighted in the green boxes, are designed to capture non-operative skills within those specific clinical settings. However, certain observable behaviors, such as those in the preoperative phase of the appendicitis EPA, are rarely seen in settings such as the clinic. This creates a dissonance between expectations and reality, as the current use of EPA assessments do not align with the intent of capturing non-operative skills in broad clinical settings. Additionally, this makes EPAs cognitively tasking for users to complete. We hypothesize that EPAs may inadequately capture key observable behaviors relevant to non-operative entrustment across various clinical settings, specifically within the clinic or the hospital preoperative area. We designed our study based off two concepts. The first is of human-centered design, which is an approach utilizing 4 design thinking stages that places people at the core of the process. The objective is to understand why and how users are using a specific tool. And in our case, it is to understand if faculty are actually able to capture observable behaviors relevant to non-operative entrustment across different clinical settings with the current EPA design. Therefore, to assess this, we utilize a second concept called force field analysis. A force field analysis is a social scientific way to understand barriers to achieving a predefined goal. And in our case, it is to understand why we are not able to accurately capture non-operative skills. And we did this by implementing a multi-institutional survey. To start, we identified 10 of the most commonly completed EPAs, which you can see are highlighted in yellow from the national cohort. We extracted the corresponding lists of observable behaviors within the pre- and postoperative phases. So for example, the acute abdomen EPA as shown on screen right. We then performed thematic analysis as shown in the orange and dark blue boxes and aligned all identified observable behaviors with a set list of generalizable observable behaviors or GOBs. The mapping process led to this list of 21 GOBs. The first 14 were mapped from the preoperative phases, while the last 7 were mapped from the postoperative phases. And in the survey, we then asked faculty whether these 21 GOBs were either commonly or uncommonly observed within these 5 listed clinical settings. The survey was distributed to 200 faculty across 18 U.S. general surgery residency programs, and we had a 21.5% response rate. 42% of the faculty were female, and nearly a quarter were trauma surgery and critical care faculty. Faculty reported a high level of understanding of the EP assessments and considered them to be effective in evaluating resident performance. Among the 2,386 total number of times GOBs were reported as commonly observed, the hospital ward had the highest, while the hospital preoperative area had the lowest. The consistently low percentages across all clinical settings suggest that the listed the listed behaviors are not necessarily suitably targeted to specific clinical settings to accurately determine non-operative entrustment. Overall, the hospital ward was the most common place for GOB observations, and as you can see, it is highly skewed compared to the other clinical settings. Even with the exclusion of trauma surgery and critical care faculty, there was no difference in the number of GOBs observed across all clinical settings. Faculty were then asked to rank GOBs in order of importance and the number needed for entrustment. And among the 14 GOBs in the preoperative phase, faculty reported a median of 10, and amongst the 7 GOBs within the postoperative phase, 4 were needed for entrustment. Understanding indications for surgery was the driving GOB for entrustment in the preoperative phase, while anticipation of early postoperative complication was the driver for entrustment in the postoperative phase. In conclusion, though faculty believe that EPAs are effective in evaluating resident performance, the current EPA design inadequately captures key observable behaviors in diverse clinical settings relevant to pre- and postoperative entrustment. Furthermore, EPA assessments can be simplified by focusing on GOBs that were found to drive entrustment. Though we recognize our study has several limitations, including the inherent bias of the EPA mapping process, the complexity of the topic adapted to a survey format, and the limited survey window, our findings do suggest that clinical setting-specific EPAs, such as those for clinic, should be developed and actually can be streamlined to accurately assess keystone skills demonstrated in the non-operative setting. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
In the design of your survey, in order to say that you saw a generalized observable behavior, it have to be something you actually saw them do or something they reported to you that they did? Do you see why I think it's, and do you think those are equivalent?
So unfortunately, in the survey, we were unable to obtain the granularity of that data. And so, to be honest, I'm not really sure. From several sessions today, I do think that it is relatively unrealistic for faculty to really observe every single behavior. And I think it goes to show that, this is why we're going to competency-based assessments and evaluating a resident holistically. Can we entrust this resident to do A, B, and C? And those skill sets can further be extrapolated into different situations.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Dr. Jorge Rodriguez, understanding how surgery applicants use the impactful experiences field in residency applications.
Hi, my name is Jorge Zarate Rodriguez, and I'm a PGY5 at WashU, and I'm going to be talking about how general surgery applicants use the impactful experiences field in residency applications. I have no disclosures. So I don't have to tell anybody in the room that the landscape of residency applications has changed considerably over the last couple of years. Applicants today are each submitting more applications than ever before, and the application itself has more data points but fewer objective data. Now, this leaves PDs struggling to process a large volume of information in a very short amount of time, and applicants wondering how to distinguish themselves from the bunch. One of these new data points is the impactful experience question that ERAS added for the 2022-2023 cycle. Applicants are supposed to use this space to describe obstacles and challenges they have overcome along their journey to residency, and the AAMC provides this helpful list of examples. They also explicitly say that this is supposed to be information that is not elsewhere captured, aka not the same as a personal statement. The utility and impact of this box remains unclear, however. In the most recent ERAS applicant survey, only half of the applicants felt that this box helped provide any relevant context to their application. And on the PD side, while 70% said that they did use this information to decide who to interview, only 20% felt that it added anything beyond what the application already captured. So in this context, we set out to try to understand how our applicants are answering this question. So we did a retrospective review of applications to our program for the 2024 match cycle. We collected de-identified demographic information to compare the applicants submitting impactful experience statements, or IESs, to those who did not. And then we did thematic analysis of the content of their IES and personal statements based on the list of examples from the AAMC. We did add a category for personal identity, we also folded in the concept of going unmatched into the other experiences. This was a prevalent theme that we kept on seeing in the personal statements. So here's the data. Applicants who submitted IES were more likely to be, all right, were more likely to self-identify as URM, and accordingly were also more likely to belong to a racial or ethnic minority. They're also more likely to be DO or IMG, and that kind of makes sense because these groups are arguably more likely to face obstacles in their journey to residency. Applicants with IES were also less likely to have AOA or gold humanism status, and it is possible that applicants' struggles in their journey to residency may have also prevented them from qualifying for these honors. Looking at the thematic analysis, almost all of the IES that we reviewed described themes that fell into one of the categories that we described a priori, with less than 1% of applicants writing statements that did not fit into any of the themes. These are probably applicants that did not really understand the prompt. And the most common themes were those in the category of other and in family background. In terms of personal statements, most applicants discussed themes of hardship that were consistent with our categories, the most common ones being similarly family and other. And you'll notice also that a sizable proportion of the population had statements that described multiple themes, which kind of makes sense because some of these themes do tend to run together. So for example, a low-income family is also likely to be living in a setting where there's poverty and food scarcity. Next, we compare the personal statements of applicants with and without IES. So almost 85% of the applicants with IES also use their personal statements to describe themes of hardship, with almost 50% describing multiple themes. And we're going to return to that in a minute. But first, we're going to look at the applicants without IES. And we see that almost 60% of applicants who describe adversity themes in their personal statements, 60% of applicants do also describe adversity themes in their personal statements, mostly in the categories of family and other, with nearly 20% discussing multiple themes. And so this kind of raises the question that if these applicants had relevant experiences, why didn't they just use the IES box? Returning to that concept of redundancy, even though the double AMC advises against this, we saw that nearly 85% of applicants use both their IESs and their personal statements to describe obstacles that they had tackled. We went back to see whether applicants were describing different themes in each of the statements, but in this table, you can see that we quantified that a significant proportion of applicants were repeating the exact same theme. So you can see that, for example, almost 2/3 of the applicants who describe family background in their IESs were also describing the same topic in their personal statements. It is possible that we need just more education on how to use this field. And it's also possible that maybe our scoring system was not sensitive enough to capture whether people were describing similar experiences that both happened to fall in the same category, but that were overall distinct. And that's a limitation of the study here. So in conclusion, the impactful experience question allows applicants to describe hardships that they've endured in their journey and to help put their applications into context. But less than half of the applicants are using or seizing this opportunity. Despite guidance against it, about 85% of applicants use IES to discuss themes that they already captured in their personal statements. And on the flip side, 58% of applicants that had relevant experiences did not relate these in their IESs, which could represent a missed opportunity. So going back to that question about why would applicants who had relevant materials in their application choose not to use the impactful experience box, I think part of the issue that we're seeing here has to do with framing. So we're essentially asking applicants to self-identify as disadvantaged, which literature from the undergraduate world has shown is challenging for a variety of reasons. First, disadvantaged applicants may not realize that they are disadvantaged because they're comparing themselves to other people in their circles who have experienced more hardship than them. Number two, even if applicants do recognize that they face adversity, in the vacuum of an application process, they may not know whether their specific struggle is hardship enough, and the risk of not meeting the expectations of the admissions committee is quite high. And then lastly, some applicants may be concerned that the adversity that they describe in their applications may be seen, instead of being seen as resilience, is actually seen as a personal failure and who count them against them instead. So thank you so much for your time and for the opportunity to present. Thanks for all my co-authors, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Hi, thanks. My name is John Greer from MGH, and I actually think this is a really cool thing to look at because I found this year that some people really had no understanding of what this box was for. And there were a few people whose applications I excluded just because I felt like they overshared in a way that was almost inappropriate. And so I do think for the mentors in the room, in the same way that we read the personal statement to make sure that it jives with your personal narrative, I would also recommend asking your candidates, your applicants, what they're going to put in that box, because some things are really just unprofessional, actually. But certainly the hardship and, a lot of people that grew up in significant adversity, it's a perfect place for. But a lot of the personal life stuff, I would caution the applicants against using. So thank you for looking into this. Fascinating.
Yeah, that is a great comment. There was a survey of advisors as well, and they asked them how they felt about this box, and over half of them felt that they could not really advise applicants well enough about how to answer this question. And relating to your comment about, some of the material being maybe inappropriate, the second paper that I had, the one from medical education, goes into quite a bit of depth about this question. The applicants don't really know exactly where the bar is and what the applicant and what the committee actually wants to hear when they put this box. And so if you've got a personal I don't know, like a struggle with mental health, then you're sort of stuck between trying to decide whether you want to provide that feedback or, sorry, that context for like, hey, that's why I really struggled in my surgical clerkship. And then also it being a double-edged sword and actually used against you. So it's a bit of a catch-22.
Quick question, Dr.
Harrington
Green.
from Brown. I was very struck by your initial data about how the applicants felt about that box, because I did feel some oversharing in that box. I felt like a voyeur at times, and the pressure being put on applicants maybe is inappropriate to fill that box. And so that is probably the most interesting part of your study. And I would love to hear your paper and write this up and have some discussion about this further, because that's, like I said, I felt like a voyeur.
Yeah, that is a great point. Basically, we're forcing applicants to disclose some of their most personal trauma for a chance that it may increase their interview odds without any promise that it will. And so for some people, I don't know, survivors of sexual trauma, for example, having to relive this over and over again, because if you put in your application, it's fair game for your interviewer to ask you about it. And so we could, there's also like an ethical question here about what we're doing, what we're asking applicants to do for the, possibility that it may improve their odds of interviews.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the session. Thank you to all the presenters to staying very much on time, and great group of presentations. Please stay for the APDS presentation of awards.